The ego. We all have one, but what exactly is the ego? A lot of the language that we use associated with ego is always negative. If you call someone an egoist, you're saying they're selfish. If you say that someone is egocentric, means they're self-centered. At the extreme, that would be an egomaniac. For those of us that train in combative martial arts like jiu-jitsu or Muay Thai or even sports in general, we've all heard the term, leave the ego at the door. That would seem to indicate that the ego is so bad, it can't even come inside. You gotta leave that thing outside. Or when something is a blow to the ego, does that mean that the ego is fragile and needs protecting? I think we need to talk about it. So the term ego, I believe, was coined by Sigmund Freud a long time ago. And ego basically means the self. But that's not very descriptive. What do we mean by the self? Well, what we mean by the self is our own internal perception of ourselves. So in a sense, our ego is our consciousness, our self-perception. But the real question is our self-perception in accordance with reality? That's the real question. So when we're talking about the ego, certainly the ego as being something bad, what we're talking about is an inflated ego that doesn't have a good correlation with reality. It's an unrealistic ego. And as such, it becomes a fragile ego because that grandiosity has to be protected. And we see that in a jiu-jitsu context, we see that in a martial arts context or a sports context where someone walks in the door of a jiu-jitsu academy and they have to protect this sense of self. And so what does that mean when they protect their sense of self? Well, it means that their entire expression of jiu-jitsu on the mat is going to be with the intent of keeping that ego intact, not allowing reality to penetrate that ego because that can be a difficult thing. And so maybe you hold that submission, or maybe you fight that submission till the very, very, very end. You don't want to tap. Or maybe you are extremely aggressive because you have to win at all costs. So the big ego makes you a bad student because in order to be a good student, you have to have a much more neutral ego, an ego that accepts that you don't know certain things, an ego that accepts that you're not necessarily going to be good all the time at this martial art. It's a journey. So when we talk about check your ego, leave your ego at the door, etc., we're talking about the unrealistic ego. We're talking about the ego that is an impediment to healthy emotions and healthy internal dialogue, healthy relationships, healthy interactions in the sports that we do, the martial arts that we do. Because you realize that ultimately we are all a mixed bag. We've got some good qualities, we've got some poor qualities, and we need to recognize all this and use it to have a neutral ego and one that's not overinflated. I've always said that the mats are truth. The mats are truth. They don't care. They don't care about your reality. Because when you step on the mat, you're only as good as you are. You're no better, you're no worse. And every day that you train, you have to reestablish your position in the grand order. And that never changes. And some nights you win, some nights you lose. But there is always, always truth there. And for those people out there that don't have something in their life like that, it can be very easy to build a false sense of self, an inflated sense of self that needs to get punctured once in a while so that we can operate mostly in a neutral place, a neutral ego. That's the goal.